Chapter 1 Carnage Rising. I am Carnage. Fans of the Venom arc in the Marvel Comics had been waiting for quite a while to witness Carnage to be brought to the screens. One of the reasons behind this hype has to be maximum carnage, and the game adaptation of the arc only helped it further, with the rock soundtrack fitting perfectly with the narrative. The story starts with Spider-Man Unlimited Volume 1, Number 1, as we see Cletus Cassidy in prison being transferred for some experiments to be conducted upon him. This is quite similar to how we saw the character before his escape in the 2021 film Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Sticking to his persona, Cassidy promises one of the officers escorting him that he'll be slaughtered quickly and with minimal agony. He enters singing the bridal chorus with his own gruesome edits to the lyrics of the song. Cassidy was actually being taken for some experiments to be conducted on him in order to cure him, but we know very well that whatever he has can't be cured that easily. He breaks out of the chains and manages to slay, since this was the very opportunity he'd been waiting for all this time in the prison. Carnage comes over and makes sure every living soul around him in the facility is dead, in particular the guards and the reinforcements. But before he could head out of this facility, he'd have an interesting interaction and tag someone along with himself. Shriek was also being kept in a rather high security, and that's one of the things that impresses Carnage as he breaks through the reinforcements to get her out. This is the first time that fans get to witness Shriek, whose powers actually prove to be something that might make Carnage reconsider putting her on his team. Even though the character carries herself very nicely in the narrative, she might be considered to be somewhat like Harley Quinn and Joker when paired with Carnage. You do get to see a rather toxic relationship unfold between her and Carnage. Meanwhile, our hero, Peter Parker, is at a funeral for Harry Osborn, who died due to the Goblin formula, according to the arc from Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Number 200. Since the last thing Harry did before he died was try to save him, Peter has a heavy heart and doesn't want to talk about it. This loss has a strong impact on both Peter and Mary Jane and their families. Peter does plant a seed of thought, wondering whether it makes sense that the concepts of family and foe often get mixed together in his field of work. We do get to see him coming back with this thought again going ahead. As Carnage and Shriek head towards the city with plans to take their individual revenge on the heroes who'd got them captured, they tell each other their stories. One might say this is the beginning of an interesting relationship, but give that thought a little bit more time. They come across Spider-Man's duplicate, Doppelganger, and instead of attacking him, they put the crazy rendition of the friendly neighborhood hero on their team. Doppelganger was brought back to life by none other than Demo Goblin, who might have been using the vicious copy as bait. He won't be the only new addition to the villain's team, as we can expect more characters to come and play their part. Carnage heads out a separate way for his personal plans while the others are discovered by Spidey. Our primary villain is planning none other than to go back to his original plan when he was free and roaming around town, slaying people one by one. This time he'd go to J. Jonah Jameson, who was supposed to be the next person on his list of people to be killed when he was going around doing this deed last time. It's interesting to see how Jameson always plans to deface Spider-Man while the latter continues to save him. It's almost like that whatever happens, Spidey and Jameson will have an interesting relationship in any universe. Doppelganger turns out to be a puppy that Carnage is almost about to kill, but Shriek decides to keep him alive and make him a part of the team. This is where we see an interesting difference in the brutality the two major villains will be adhering to in this entire narrative. Harry was my best friend. This narrative will see the rendition of Spider-Man who's in a crisis as he tries to figure out where he should dedicate more time between family and being a superhero. When, on the one side, one of his biggest enemies is out in the open, Peter Parker is still recovering from his past and the recent events in his life. As they return from the funeral, Peter and Mary Jane have a chat regarding how to move on from this and decide to slow things down for a while. But would that be the case, considering a certain someone is out there butchering people hither and thither? While things do go a bit awry for Peter Parker in the future, with Mary Jane parting ways with him, we do witness Mary Jane starting to wonder about how the constant worrying regarding Peter Parker. Peter Parker's arc during this period of the run is very similar to the pulpy 90s action films with heroes played by actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, or Sylvester Stallone. And while it might be seen to be quite weird nowadays, it was quite the hit back then, and this only makes it a lot more special for Marvel fans. This arc has a goofy charm to it, and this can be seen to develop a lot more as the narrative unfolds. Another aspect of our favorite hero will also be explored here regarding the way that he deals with his enemies. Spider-Man seems to be wondering how most of his enemies return after a while, and he has to face them again and again, but that won't be the case with Harry. With Carnage returning, Spider-Man is reminded of the absolute mayhem that he had struck the last time he was in action, and it might push Spidey to change his ways of dealing with his enemies. Not only that, but Carnage being lost also means that our web crawler might have to seek help from another one of his foes who had helped him out last time, Venom. Are you wondering why the movie didn't explore these aspects of the SpiderMan arc? I mean, that would have been pretty cool, considering we do get to witness a lot of interesting characters jump in, with some that Sony doesn't even have the rights to. As Peter heads out to get some food, he sees the news coverage regarding the events of Ravencroft. It reminds him of an old foe whom he'd put up at the maximum security prison, and the massacre only confirms his suspicion. As usual, our hero puts on the mask and heads to his role, only to discover his spider doppelganger and Shriek waiting for him. Since we don't know the full strength of Shriek's sonic powers, it seems like it might be smooth sailing for Spider-Man, considering what he's faced before, but one might reconsider. While Spidey faces somewhat of an equal opponent, this time around he's being coached by Shriek along with her own attacks on him. So he decides to put down Shriek first and then go for Doppelganger, and he almost wins, but Doppelganger gets the drop on him and puts him down. Seeing Shriek down, Doppelganger takes her away, leaving Spider-Man in an alleyway. Considering Spider-Man was already somewhat weak from his previous battles, we can understand that it would be really difficult for Spider-Man to fight off this trio of villains this way, but there's hope since Spider-Man ain't alone. Chapter 2, Dark Light. I've always wanted to thank you. With Spider-Man left in the alleyway, a gang of passers-by discover this treasure and jump to attack the web crawler. Spidey's still coming to his senses and there's no chance he could fight back. Right then, we see the epic duo of Cloak and Dagger appear out of nowhere for Spider-Man's defense. This is the exciting part of comic books since the movies can't easily bring in any character outright, as that would have a lot of legalities involved. But in the comics, over the years, there have been a lot of such moments of ex machina where other heroes or groups of heroes have appeared in order to help our protagonist out. This only makes sense considering these characters are also living in New York, so they're aware of the events surrounding them, and it only makes sense for them to join along with our hero to save the day. The duo discovers that Spidey is injured, so they take him back to their lair in order to help him out with his injuries. There, they realize that Spidey needs a lot more help than some mere bandages, and he should get some rest. But that won't be easy since the enemy duo of Shriek and her newfound pet Doppelganger is looking for him. Doppelganger tracks Spidey, breaks into Cloak and Dagger's place, and unleashes an attack on all of them. Following that, there's a sonic boom that hits them all from Shriek as she's close behind Doppelganger, waiting for her chance to attack the heroes. We find that Shriek might have some history with Cloak, as she mentions that this one is personal. According to Shriek, she was a drug dealer at one point, and Cloak had put her on in his black abyss, which might have triggered some part of the madness that she exhibits. Following that, she once had an altercation with Cloak after receiving her powers. Not only that, but Shriek had actually managed to find Cloak's weakness, since her sonic blasts, when aimed at his echo chamber, only magnified them and impacted him. Dagger stops Shriek and tries to her back as Cloak recovers and Spidey tries to fight off his doppelganger. As the trio of heroes are almost figuring out a way to end this, Carnage enters the fight, launching an attack on Spider-Man. Spidey and Cloak realize that it'd be really difficult to deal with Carnage alone, as he might prove to be more powerful than the other enemy duo. Cloak makes an attempt at pulling Shriek into the confines of his cloak, but since Shriek has experienced it before, she finds a way to pull herself out of it, and she continues her attacks on Cloak. As Carnage and Spider-Man battle it out, Shriek decides to go for a final move and take her revenge on Cloak by killing him, but Dagger comes in the way, and a massive energy burst takes place, throwing off Spider-Man, who would try to move Cloak away from the attack. This is when we get to witness one of the first problematic moments in the relationship between Carnage and Shriek, as the former goes to beat her up, because her attack could have killed Spidey, and according to Spidey, only Carnage has the privilege to do that. But before he can continue to hit her, Doppelganger comes to her rescue by attacking Carnage as she sneaks away. Carnage follows her, stating that he needs to establish his leadership. This is why the team of the enemies needs a stable person to take the decisions, as they mostly consist of absolute lunacy. But this turns out to be lucky for Spider-Man and Cloak, who realized that Dagger disappeared after the energy burst. As the enemies were heading out, someone was observing them, probably trying to find the perfect timing to make their presence felt. But this isn't the only character that teases her, as we see somewhere in San Francisco a couple of goons getting beaten up by the much-awaited anti-hero Venom. Venom gets to hear about the events unfolding in New York with Carnage's mayhem. Venom realizes that he has to go there and stop Carnage before things turn really awry. Things have turned really dark as fans of Cloak and Dagger are well aware that Cloak will not let the loss of Dagger go easy. He might take matters in a different way now that his significant other has succumbed to the blows of Shriek. But fans of Let There Be Carnage might find it interesting that the movie picks up the trope of the toxicity that exists between Carnage and Shriek. Though initially the duo seemed like they could prove to be really dangerous for the heroes, it turns out that there are internal issues that they haven't talked about, and this leads to them fighting it out with each other. In the movie, we even got to witness Carnage attacking Shriek, but the sonic bursts that she was throwing at Venom were also affecting Carnage, since it's one of their major weaknesses. But there is a chance that they might talk it out going ahead, or would they get the time to do so, finding time away from wreaking havoc everywhere they went? Chapter 3. Demons on Broadway. Upon realizing that his and Spider-Man's common enemy is back in town, Venom heads back to New York, taking an oath that this time he'll make sure that Carnage never gets to make a comeback again. But this time, Venom's return to New York will be somewhat different since he's no longer in a fight with Spider-Man since the last time he crossed paths with him, so he can now only focus on Carnage. Meanwhile, Spider-Man's trying to console Cloak following the latter's loss as Dagger bursts along with the energy burst that Shriek hit her with. He promises that he'll avenge the death of Dagger, but right when Spider-Man is about to talk to him, he teleports somewhere else. This is an important development for Spidey, since he'd also lost family recently with the death of Harry, and now he was getting to witness the impact of a somewhat similar loss affecting a friend of his. He needs to get back to a stable point in order to figure out how to deal with the enemy, or he might start losing more friends with the way Carnage and his team are going around killing people. Meanwhile, Carnage confronts Shriek for her decision to attack Spidey and lashes out at her, explaining that he's the only one who gets to attack the hero. As this pair goes through an argument, we see Peter returning to Mary Jane, where she tells him that she knew where Peter might have disappeared after saying that he was going to bring her food. But she isn't calm about it, as she mentions that Peter had promised that he'd put Spider-Man to rest for a while, but he didn't keep that promise. It's an interesting thing to see two different couples having completely different dynamics and troubles. While one of them is trying to establish who's superior to them, the other is showing concern for one another. Mary Jane references the death of Harry and the loss as something that Peter should keep in mind before going out again, but Peter tells her he has to go. Otherwise, there's no one on the path to Carnage's mayhem. On the other hand, Carnage and Shriek are having a battle of words regarding who's the leader, with Doppelganger acting like the child who's very protective of Shriek and defending her by fighting Carnage. The trio of villains go to unleash their attack in Central Park now, and Peter heads out again to catch them. But on the way towards the trio, he comes across Demogoblin, who's been observing the events transpiring in New York so far. Spider-Man thinks he's not caught the eyes of Demogoblin yet and follows him, but the Goblin fools him and attacks him with a pumpkin bomb. But this time, it isn't an exploding bomb. Instead, it's some sort of gooey living dark stuff that completely takes over Spidey, like the Venom. Venom gets the news that there are forces being dispatched around Central Park due to Carnage's attack and decides to head over there to face his foe. Just when Spidey thinks he's done with the Goblin launching another attack on him, the hero is saved by the citizens as a preacher goes against him. Before Demogoblin can attack the preacher, Spidey takes him out of the way of another one of his bombs while the villain goes away. This was a close shave for Spidey, considering his ribs had only gotten worse after the previous attack. Back in Central Park, Venom approaches Carnage, to the latter's surprise, but gets jumped on himself when Doppelganger and Shriek go at him from behind. Back at his home, as Peter recovers from his wounds, he checks the news about the massacre unleashed by Carnage, and Mary Jane reminds him that he could have been one of the victims. They hear a knock on the door, and it's none other than Eddie Brock, beaten to a pulp. Now, it seems that both Eddie and Peter have to sit down and discuss a proper way to deal with the enemy, or it's only going to get much worse with the way things are. While the fans of the movie might be wondering how Venom managed to get beaten up by Carnage the very moment he entered the narrative, it might be interesting to know that Carnage had been waiting for this opportunity for a while now. But things are only getting worse for our heroes, with each of them getting in a bad condition after their first interaction with Carnage. They need to figure out a way to stop the enemy so that it doesn't continue to hurt them more than they've already been hurt. Chapter 4. Team Venom. Carnage's team heads over to a place that Shriek used to come to, somewhere they store props for rock concerts. It perfectly fits their entire vibe, considering Shriek's attire and appearance are very much similar to a fan attending a concert by the rock band Kiss. The game does justice to this arc by playing it on heavy metal music, and that's one of the reasons why the game became a fan favorite. As this new family of villains plans their future, they're visited upon by another interesting villain, Demogoblin. Mary Jane reminds Peter of Venom's primary goal, that of killing Spider-Man. But Peter tries to convince her that things have changed quite considerably. But it becomes very clear that she's had enough for the time being and can't put up with this situation where one of her husband's most dangerous enemies is sleeping in their house. Venom tells Spider-Man that they only need some rest and they didn't come to Spider-Man to make a team because they had no choice. Peter is in desperate need of advice and starts regretting the fact that Mary Jane has left and decides to seek advice from someone else before he goes insane with the absolute madness that's happening all around him. It's interesting to see that for one moment Peter thinks he should web Venom up as the latter is resting, but then he realizes that it would only create a difference of opinions between them as he needs Venom to go against Carnage. Peter goes to Felicia Hardy to get advice regarding his present dilemma with both Venom and Carnage being in New York. She suggests that they need to help Venom go against Carnage, but Peter tries to stop her from coming along. Meanwhile, we see Mary Jane has gone to Aunt May's house, which might be a safer option considering the number of Peter's enemies who have gotten together in the past few hours. Meanwhile, Demogoblin meets up with the team of villains, telling them about his plans for the next few attacks that they can go for. Shriek tries to attack him, but they prove to be worthless. And at the same time, Doppelganger doesn't come to her rescue either now that he's confused with whom to favor, as Demogoblin was the one who brought him back to life. Demogoblin gives a long and vicious speech regarding his plans to kill people, but Carnage only focuses on the kill people aspect and asks him to join them. Things aren't so easy on the other hand, with Spider-Man still wondering if he should join hands with Venom, who's a ruthless killer, in order to fight Carnage. But Black Cat tries to convince him it's only for the greater good of the wild being. As Demogoblin agrees to join hands with the team of villains, Shriek expresses her concern about letting him in on the team, but Carnage tells her he knows that the Goblin might cross them, but until then, they might get a chance to slaughter a lot more together. As Eddie Brock comes back to his senses and Venom takes over, they discover Black Cat in the apartment, who thinks twice about joining hands with Venom. She was once beaten up by the anti-hero. She decides that she'll stick to her plan and team up with him to defeat the enemy. But before they can head out, Spider-Man arrives and sets a condition that they won't be killing anyone and focus on defeating the enemy instead. While saying all this, he's worried about Black Cat's involvement in this, and she's the weakest one amongst them, and he'll have to protect her no matter what and prevent something like what happened with Dagger. As the team of villains is about to head out for their next attack, Cloak shows up, and he's not going to go easy on the team of villains. But Shriek hits him right away and puts him down, and this actually turns out to be good as the sonic burst gives away the location to our heroes. As they rush in to attack their enemies, Spidey once again reminds them that they won't be killing anyone today. As the heroes battle with the villains, we see that Shriek has been able to get hold of attacking Black Cat with the help of Doppelganger, and this leads to Spider-Man stopping her as Cloak is about to unleash his full wrath upon Carnage, but the latter manages to escape. Demogoblin burns down the roof of the building while Shriek decides to bring it down. The villains head out, saying that they have other business, and Cloak also manages to teleport, leaving Spidey along with Venom and Black Cat. The fire weakens Venom, who gives away after a while of following the enemy. But Spider-Man realizes he has to save Black Cat, who was left behind in the burning building. This puts Spidey in a dilemma over what he should do, since the group of villains is getting away while his friends seem to be in danger. We all know what Spider-Man would do, but then it leaves us wondering if that's the better move to make at a time like this, or not. Chapter 5. Over the line. You'll get no mercy from Spider-Man. Spider-Man makes the noble decision to not go for the enemies and stay back and help out his friends, and it seems that this will have some consequences for him. He discovers Venom weakened due to the fire and Black Cat under the rubble of the fallen roof. As he goes to lend them a hand, Venom conveys his anger regarding Spidey's decision to not follow Carnage and head back to help them out. Here we get to witness Venom's perspective, as he doesn't care about the sacrifice he might have to make in order to get rid of his enemy, but Spider-Man prioritizes his friends and family first. While Venom does kinda make sense, we know that it's fairly obvious that Spidey couldn't have left behind Black Cat to die while being struck down in the rubble. But then we get to see how far Venom will go as he stops to fight Spidey instead of deciding to go and follow Carnage. Spidey's move only backfires a bit more when Black Cat lashes out at him for considering that she was a damsel in distress. Black Cat and Venom team up and leave Spider-Man behind because Spidey realizes he can't be allied with the bloodthirsty rules that Venom was laying out for them. But this won't be the only team we'll get to see the break, as the team of villains comes to a certain disagreement around the same time. As Carnage and Shriek continue their love affair, Demogoblin tries to drop some sense into them regarding a possible plan for their mayhem. But Carnage attacks him and states that there's no plan, and they'll continue to do whatever they want to do because, well, to him, the only plan is no plan. Just when they're about to attack each other, Shriek comes between them and decides to stop things from getting any worse and talk some sense into Carnage. Demogoblin decides that he'll stick with Carnage for the time being just because some of their interests do seem to be common. It seems Shriek is the smart one as she softens Carnage by conveying the fact that both Demogoblin and Doppelganger could be their kids, while they could be the parents. And it does seem to be working on Carnage. It might seem to be all lovey-dovey, but we can be pretty sure that Carnage can beat up Shriek if she does go against him again. With this massive conflict in his mind, Peter decides to go to Aunt May, but doesn't share anything but the letter, knowing Peter understands something is wrong. He tells her about the conflict and comes to terms with why he considers he'll do things the way he does without being absolutely brutal with his enemies. Uncle Ben and Aunt May raised him in a particular way in order to make sure he was a good human being first, and Peter realizes that, more than ever, he should stick to how he's not changing his ways based on the present circumstances. As he's about to head out, he's stopped by his father, who was listening to the entire conversation. This is an interesting development because ever since his return, we haven't really seen them having a conversation like this in order to get an idea of what sort of influence he'll have on Peter. He mentions that Ben might be looking at things in a different way, but based on his experience in the confines of the Soviet prison, fire needs to be hit with fire. After having faced the devil face to face, he's learned his lesson, and he thinks that Peter should not sit back and actually focus on making a much stronger move. Luckily, Peter doesn't accept this belief and sticks to his own rules. On the other side, Venom and Black Cat track the absolute chaos and the murder rampage the group of villains laid down across the town. They see that things have gotten really worse, and Cloak also appears and states that he's not in the most stable condition to fight these villains. They start planning and realize that they'll have to get some more people on their side in order to fight the enemy. The evil couple thinks about what they'll do next, along with their kids, aka Demogoblin and Doppelganger, considering they had wreaked quite a havoc across the town. As they head out, Carrion emerges from the sewers and starts following them. As Spider-Man heads back to follow his enemies, he keeps pondering upon the things that his father said, and he really wonders if his father sticks to those beliefs. But upon coming down to the streets, he discovers things have gone absolutely crazy, as people are seen rioting all across town, fighting each other, and only increasing the chaos that Carnage had started. Spidey realizes that this is definitely because of the influence of Carnage, and he decides to talk to the people and calm them down. But he seems to fail, as the people continue to attack him and beat him up. After a certain point, Spidey gives up and states that he'll do whatever he can in order to stop the city from going down into flames. This is interesting, considering the madness amongst the people is very much similar to the things Richard Parker was talking about, and it seems that it's had an influence on Peter too, as he might be doing things differently this time around. This issue is actually rather important, considering the narrative sees Spider-Man going through a complete transition from the opening to this ending. Chapter 6, Sinking Fast. Happy hour is over. Now that things have gotten very serious, we'll slowly get to see new characters start appearing in the scene. The very first character to appear would be Morbius, the vampire, who will be approached by Venom, keeping the latter's promise of bringing together the most vicious and best fighters in order to battle the enemy. But even when they're bringing this new member in, Black Cat sets out the one condition she had even when Spider-Man was with them: nobody has to die. Meanwhile, Peter Parker bandages his injury without giving himself the slightest amount of rest while following his turn as being ruthless. He thinks about it for a while and realizes that only Mary Jane could have talked him out of this new way of dealing with things. Mary Jane's at the newly opened club, The Deep, dancing around, and she mistakes some random stranger for Peter Parker for a second there. It seems she feels weird about the way that she left things with Peter, but at the same time thinks that he should have had more time for her than his enemies. Suddenly, the gang of villains jumps into the club and starts attacking the people in there, killing anyone who they come across, and Mary Jane tries to find a place to hide. The broken band of heroes, now with Morbius, follows the bodies of the victims in order to trace the path followed by the enemy and reach the club. But the heroes realize that while they have a new member, there are more people on Carnage's side. As Venom demands a fair fight, Carnage picks up Mary Jane and decides to make her his next victim. But Venom manages to save her and reminds her that now he's even with Spider-Man for saving his ex-wife back in Amazing Spider-Man number 375. Morbius tries to face Demogoblin's bombs, while Black Cat attacks Shriek, Cloak tries to contain Doppelganger, and Venom faces off against his enemy, Carnage. Right then, Spider-Man joins the underdogs, and Venom questions whether he's going to change his ways, which Spider-Man states it's just for this time that he has to sink to this low, but he isn't really into it as a plan. Things take an interesting turn as Shriek realizes that the heroes have become as ruthless as them, and before it gets much worse, Carnage realizes that they have to get away, and takes Shriek along with him, while Demogoblin sets the place ablaze. Spidey discovers Mary Jane is one of the people in the club, and he goes to save her while his team is about to head out to follow Carnage and his entourage. But Spidey stops them by stating they need to save the people in the club owing him for joining the heroes at the last minute. As they save the people, Spidey tells Venom that he's going to ally with the ways Venom wants to go for Carnage, and Venom agrees to let him join the team. But as he goes for them, Mary Jane understands that there's been a change of morale in the web crawler. This is an interesting turn of events, since there could have been a moment where Spider-Man could have stopped and had a chat with Mary Jane, but as the latter observes, he couldn't even look her in the eyes. But at the same time, Cloak, who was taking the more cold turn with planning to slay Shriek for his loss, realizes that the way the heroes are helping out is a much better way to honor Dagger than what he was doing. Things might not remain this way for long, with the way the heroes carry out their work changing. Still, it's important to know that the heroes are thinking of their actions. While for a second the villains might think that they've impacted the heroes too with their ruthlessness, it won't be a permanent thing. While Morbius and Venom have been longtime enemies of Spidey, it's interesting to see the latter join them to fight their common enemy. Our hero managed to get some people saved by them. It's important to note that while Spider-Man might have changed his way for the while being, it's not going to be something he'll stick to permanently, as his savior complex will always be a part of his superhero persona. But with the ever-growing number of people joining both teams, we're left to wonder who else might be taking sides now, as the more the merrier would be the case, since the menace of Carnage has to be stopped as soon as possible. Carrion hasn't even started attacking people yet, but we can be sure he'll join the action, and our heroes need to be prepared for the increase in the number of people in Carnage's band. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Carnage rules. Now that the heroes have decided to come together and lay a common way of thinking, it seems that it might be a lot more efficient, considering Spider-Man knows the enemy better than anyone. Spidey takes the heroes to the St. Estes home for boys where Cletus Cassidy was raised, and he thinks this place might give them some idea regarding what their next plan of attack for the enemy should be. But they only come to realize what paved the way for the bloodshed mindset that Cassidy has now gotten into ever since he took turns as Carnage. They realize that Carnage has had a massive impact on the common people too, and they should figure out a way to get rid of this root of evil before it spreads further. As they list out the possible ways to attack Carnage, they realize that he's still a spawn of Venom, and the latter's weakness for Reed Richards' sonic gun could be a good start. As they think of getting the gun from the Fantastic Four headquarters, they wonder if getting a Human Torch in their team could be essential, since fire is also one of the weaknesses. But sadly, Spider-Man states that the Fantastic Four is out of town, and they might have to seek someone else for that purpose, Firestar. But when they realize it might take some effort to find her and get her help, Cloak reminds them that he could find her with his teleporting abilities. Fans might feel sad that we won't get to witness the Avengers or the Fantastic Four in this narrative, but there might be some other interesting names popping up going ahead in the story. As Spider-Man heads out with Black Cat and Venom to get the sonic gun, he thinks about the distance he created between him and Mary Jane when they came across each other at the club. He wonders whether he should have stopped and talked to her since that time. She might have seen him in a completely different light, but then he comes to terms with the fact that he has an enemy with Carnage out and about, and he has to do something about it before it gets too late. Spider-Man isn't the only one who's had to change his ways, as Morbius is also a part of the team and has been made to forget about his bloodthirst for a while now. He heads to Ravencroft in order to find some more details on their fresh enemy, Shriek, but before he can head back, he realizes that it's about to dawn and he has to head back to his chambers. Meanwhile, the team of villains continues with their spree as they attack the Metropolitan Museum and discover that they've just gotten another member when Carrion comes to their help. But Shriek remembers that Carrion had died a while back due to an explosion, but Carnage doesn't give a hoot and asks her to continue with their ways. This will be an interesting plot point since Carrion and Shriek will have an interaction in their arcs where the latter will be bringing the ghastly villain back to life. On the other hand, we see that Mary Jane is feeling conflicted now that Peter has completely given up on his promise to make sure that he puts the Spider-Man cape down and has instead paired up with a team of villains. Somewhere in the city, Deathlock discovers the news of the absolute mayhem that spread over New York and decides to find the root of all this and eliminate it. As the trio of heroes heads towards the Fantastic Four HQ, Spidey takes a detour when he sees that there are some citizens in trouble, and again, Black Cat and Venom remind him that he's gone warm again with the amount of time he wasted that could instead have been utilized in getting hold of Carnage. As the chaos continues to spread to the streets, someone goes to attack Richard and Aunt May as they're strolling around the streets. But Richard doesn't hold back as he hits this man with a plank of wood and conveys to May that the good in the people has gone for now. It seems that even the good has been consumed by the evil that's causing the chaos, and the band of villains is succeeding in their plans. As Deathlock goes to attack Carnage, he discovers that he made a mistake since he isn't alone and gets taken out by the group of villains. But there's a solution, and it seems the heroes are much closer to it than ever, as Spider-Man has managed to get hold of the sonic gun, and at the same time, Firestar has also joined their team, thanks to Cloak. It's amazing to see how well organized the heroes managed to make a plan and get it going, and now they have a better chance at the enemy. Chapter 8. Hate is in the air. Carnage never dies. Now that the team of heroes has a plan in their hands, they'll decide that they'll have to use every means possible and play it safe to get the villain and his team to fall into their trap. They head towards the offices of the Daily Bugle and seek the help of J. Jonah Jameson. It's funny how, throughout this narrative, we can see Spider-Man seeking help from all of his enemies, and now he's going to demand help from the only human being who hates Spidey's guts. But this time around, they need him to get Carnage to get back to the place of his origin, the St. Estes home for boys. While JJ does ridicule Spider-Man for hanging out with this team of villains, we see that it also helps out since when he denies doing what Spidey demands, he realizes he has no place to put them away. The rest of the team might have gotten used to this way of things, but the same is not the case for Firestar, as she's just joined them, and she does wonder if sinking to the same low as their enemy would be an ideal move, but it seems to have worked out. While we're left to wonder if Spider-Man has completely changed his ways, his family might be going through the same thing on the other side of the city. As Richard Parker takes Aunt May along with him to safety, a gang of goons called the Bedrocks faces them. But things seem to have not gotten that worse since Flash Thompson, Molten Man, comes up and beats up the goons in order to save Peter Parker's family. This is a very important moment in the comics since we can slowly see a lot of people giving up their hope in the entire idea of good. But Flash Thompson, who's been seen quite often battling it out with Spider-Man, comes to the rescue as the face of the good. As Carnage receives the message in the newspapers, he heads back to the place where it all began, along with his entourage of villains. Here, he goes ahead and starts giving the other villains a tour about him and what brought the madness that's taken over him completely. He tells them about the number of bullies and the number of ruthless beatings he had to face growing up, but now he feels stronger and also accepted by the group of villains that seem to be surrounding him at present. But this couldn't go on for long, as Spidey and his team were waiting for the right moment to jump in and attack. Meanwhile, some kid tries to help Deathlock escape from the bounds that have been put on him by the enemy team, but nothing seems to work until a fist breaks through the wall and Iron Fist reveals himself to come to save Deathlock. We can be sure that the numbers of the heroes are only increasing, as soon Morbius also joins them, except now he's sleeping at his lair till the night comes over. The heroes seem to be gaining over Carnage as they manage to get on strike from Firestar, but right then, Venom takes his chance and shoots the Sonic Disruptor right at him. But somehow, Carnage is able to bear that, so Firestar decides to hit him too, and now there seems to be some effect as we get to see Carnage getting off of Cassidy. Right then, Carnage's entourage enters back and attacks, but Venom decides that he'll go through and slay Cassidy before anyone gets a chance to do anything else. But he's stopped by Spider-Man, and at the same time, Shriek runs in to wake Cassidy, who had been begging for his life, and bring back Carnage. She hits him right in the face, and the blood seems to be the symbiote itself. It brings back Carnage. Now it's made him more powerful than ever. Just moments back, we saw that the symbiote, even though it had gotten mutated quite a bit, didn't stand a chance against the attacks it faced. But now it seems that things have played out completely differently, as Carnage is now more powerful than before. Oof, this is just like the time the Avengers held Thanos, and we're getting the gauntlet out of his hand, but due to Star-Lord's weakness, Thanos got away. But it does make us question whether Spider-Man stopped, as now that they were almost going to get away with things, he pulled Venom back from murdering Cassidy. Maybe it's that morale that all these villains that he'd paired up with hated that's preventing them from going through with his enemy once and for all. The heroes were so close to getting rid of him, but now it seems that things have taken a completely different course. Chapter 9. The Turning Point. How about a hand, son? Things have taken a really dark turn now that Spider-Man managed to let morale get in his way in getting rid of the enemy, and it seems that none of the others are gonna let that pass easily. It seems as if things are working really against Spidey all this time, as somehow even the good that he is doing around actually ends up being really helpful to the enemy. Now that Carnage is more powerful than ever, after establishing a strong link between himself and the symbiote, it'd be even more difficult to defeat him. As Spider-Man asks to get a plan together, Venom disregards it and goes straight for the kill and wants to rip out Carnage's heart. But our hero again starts to lay the moral compass, which Black Cat states is now or never, and that he and Firestar should join in before the body count reaches a whole new level. Before giving it another thought, both of them join in on the fight, but Spider-Man could feel that things have gone wrong, and that evil is soon going to take over him too, and poison him the way it's poisoned everyone around him. This has become one of the primary conflicts of this narrative, since it makes us wonder if one has to be evil just like their enemy in order to defeat them. To be as ruthless and brutal as the enemy in order to defeat them, Spider-Man in this scenario is absolutely helpless, as every time he tries to be good, it turns out to be a scenario where the enemy gets away with their ruthlessness. And considering the fact that his teammates are all comparatively a lot more ruthless, we're left wondering if he'll be able to stick to his rules anymore. Meanwhile, Mary Jane is wondering if she was too harsh on Peter for going through with donning the Spider-Man costume and battling it out with the enemy. She wonders if Peter is doing okay. If only she could have a chat with Peter at this moment of conflict for him and resolve some of it, so that he can find a way that doesn't involve slaying someone. Back at the battleground, Cloak fights it out with Shriek with his rage over the death of Dagger, continuously getting in the way of properly getting to fight her. She managed to get away from his cloak, and she conveyed to him that whatever he had caused to her was the reason that Dagger wasn't here anymore. Shriek unleashes the madness and causes an oncoming wave of people to turn to their side and go and attack the heroes. It's interesting to see that this is all because of the impact that Carnage has had on her, due to which she's completely changed the level to which she can utilize her powers. As the oncoming wave of people come to attack Morbius, he goes about using his own method of killing them, but is stopped by Black Cat, who comes in and knocks them out, making it meaningless to kill them. But she doesn't get to do this for long, as someone comes in and knocks her out before she can go through with her own way of dealing with things. As Carnage is battling the heroes, Firestar hits him once more and discovers that her powers are still working quite well on him, and she informs that to Spider-Man and Venom. But she states that the burst only affects him for a moment or two before the symbiote takes over again, and Venom suggests that the only way to end this once and for all is to hit him till he dies. In a turn of events, Venom is able to convince Spider-Man, and the latter asks Firestar to go through with it. Firestar wouldn't even have taken that thought into consideration until Spider-Man agreed to that solution. Firestar positions herself and hits Carnage, and it seems to be working. Venom's plan seems to be effective, but Spider-Man soon comes to his senses and asks her to pull back. It seems that he's realized it's not the right way, and he begs Firestar to stop, and she stops. and we see Carnage on the ground as he's close to his death. This infuriates Venom, who goes straight for Firestar and starts attacking her before Spider-Man comes and stops him. Venom lays a punch right on his face. But before he can get back to Firestar, Carnage and Shriek team up against him and weaken him till all we see is Eddie Brock lying on the ground. Shriek is angry enough to go through with killing him before Carnage stops her to make the anti-hero suffer without getting killed directly. They take him along with the sonic gun and get away. Spider-Man lies there on the ground with all the other heroes around him, weakened by the attacks they faced. As Spider-Man is about to give up all hope, a ray of hope shines on him as an old friend reaches out to give him a hand. It's none other than the beacon of hope, Captain America. Chapter 10. Sin City. Let's go tame a wild city. Spider-Man was put into a real dilemma the last time, with him almost giving in to killing Carnage, but it seems to be a spur of the moment as he stopped Firestar from going through with it. But does that mean he's back to square one, considering his team is now weaker than ever, and his decisions must have caused some of the members to walk away? But it seems that all hope is not lost yet, as we see the first Avenger, Captain America, joining hands with him to put down the enemy. The villains continue sticking to their work as they continue to destroy Manhattan and slay everyone that comes their way. Spider-Man has a newfound confidence in him now that he's managed to stick to his way of dealing with the enemy, while also being able to gather another teammate, with the Cap coming along. As they discuss a possible way to lay out a plan to attack the enemy, they discover a bug in the Avengers network, and they find Deathlock reaching out to them along with Iron Fist. While Captain America, who's always one step above most of the other superheroes, disagrees with the ways of Iron Fist and Deathlock, he takes into consideration that their ways could be useful to them in the fight against Carnage. It seems that things are finally taking another possible turn towards good, as Spider-Man's injuries are all healed due to the Avengers' equipment. But it seems Peter Parker needs to get a check before Spidey goes through with their next plan of attack on the enemy. The rest of the team of heroes or anti-heroes, consisting of Cloak and Morbius, head towards Carnage and complete their mission. They're attacked by Demogoblin and Carrion. At the same time, Venom is being tortured by the vicious couple as the duo uses both fire and sonic bursts on him. Meanwhile, Felicia's family is worried about her whereabouts as the entire family gets together at a safe place with the absolute chaos going around everywhere. Mary Jane is alone at her place, worrying about Spider-Man, and right then Peter visits her. As he's talking to her, they hear the news regarding a breakout of the terrorists being held at the local police precinct. Meanwhile, our team of anti-heroes is seriously attacked by the villains. They fail to keep up as we see Black Cat and Morbius getting mobbed by the villains. Right then, Nightwatch appears and takes away Black Cat from the equation after discovering that she was being brutally beaten up by the enemy. Spider-Man reaches the local police precinct to resolve the hostage situation held by the prisoners and manages to get through with it. As the villains try to flee, Nightwatch and Morbius follow them while Black Cat and Cloak decide to head back to their lairs, since the former is heavily injured and the latter thinks he needs some more illumination. Spider-Man, Captain America, Firestar, Deathlock, and Iron Fist get together and decide to go through with their next plan of action. Fans might notice that now we have two different groups of characters that are going to try to put an end to Carnage's mayhem. These two groups are polar opposites in the way that they're going to handle things, as it becomes quite clear that one can't really imagine Captain America teaming up with the villains who, for now, have decided to go against Carnage. But it would only be helpful for them to do so, since that would allow for a larger strength to go against the enemy. Plus, it'd be fun to see the best of the best teaming up with the occasional good to save the world. It also changes the way that Spider-Man's conflicted, since now he knows that he isn't alone in the way he's trying to deal with the enemy. And his new team will also take the righteous path, or the path with the higher morale. But is that going to be the solution to this entire crisis, is what we're left to wonder. Chapter 11. Soldiers of Hope. Trying is what counts. Now it's the turn of the heroes to take things into their own hands, fight Carnage and his team, and stop this mayhem once and for all. As Carnage continues to torture Venom at the Statue of Liberty, we see his sidekicks, Demogoblin and Doppelganger, come crashing in with injuries. Following them is none other than the duo of Nightwatch and Morbius, who continue to stick to their plan of finishing Carnage. Meanwhile, we see the fresh group of heroes head to the city, where they discover that Shriek has taken over the sanity of people and is manipulating them to cause a riot. Spider-Man and Firestar head straight for the source of all this and attack Shriek, and they try to gain her attention while Deathlock and Iron Fist jump at her from behind. But the plan fails, as she's able to put all of them out together at once. Captain America was waiting for this moment as he threw his shield at her and put her down. Meanwhile, the other team of characters continue their battle against Carnage's people, but Morbius soon realizes that the sun is coming up and he has to get away. Nightwatch takes them away to safety, so that they can come back later and continue their battle. Our heroes go to the streets and try to talk to the people, so that they can be brought to their senses and stop the riot. Each of them talks to the people, and it seems to have some effect as they realize their mistakes and get back to their senses. This proves that Spider-Man's way was effective, as the last time he was in this scenario, he decided to fight the people who were coming at him to attack him and beat him up. As they're busy with communicating with the people, Demogoblin and Doppelganger come to Shriek's rescue and free her from her bounds. But not for long, as the heroes come back and attack them, and they fight it out with each other. On the other side of the city, Felicia wonders if she should go back and help the heroes while coming to terms with the will of Spider-Man, who continued to fight for what he felt was right. And on the other hand, Cloak realizes that there's a solution to this entire battle, and that lies right there at the church where Dagger was killed by Shriek. In the streets of Manhattan, the people start attacking Shriek and her goons in support of Spider-Man and other heroes who have brought them back to their senses. Shriek realizes that her effect on the people has gone and that they're going to team up against her now. So she decides to crank her powers up and puts out her control on the people again and asks them to kill the heroes. Just when we thought things were getting better, it seems that the heroes are gonna face the people again. Chapter 12. The Light. Venom is free. The riot continues as our band of heroes tries to fight them out, put them down and stop them. Since these are the good people, they won't use means that might have brutal end results, which is why it takes more time for them to stop this riot. Looking at this, the world starts to judge how the heroes have failed, and people start getting restless with the entire situation as they're reduced to the confines of their homes while the people have gone absolutely mad on the streets. As Carnage continues to torture Venom, Venom begs him to stop, but it's all a part of his plan. When Carnage goes to use the sonic gun on him, Venom gets back his full power and breaks the chains apart. He'd managed to manipulate the gun using a bit of him, and now he unleashes a full attack on Carnage. After landing a few blows, Venom realizes that he's still a lot weaker and escapes as Carnage is completely confused by the entire ordeal. On the other hand, Cloak feels a strong presence at the church, but he's not sure what he seeks, so he desperately tries to figure out what's wrong while at the same time trying to make sure that it's not just the massive loss he's experienced that's causing this breakdown. Meanwhile, the heroes try everything as they face the people, but the goodness in them keeps stopping them from fighting back. Shriek feels that her plan has succeeded, and she decides to go back to Carnage. Meanwhile, the heroes seem to be losing their moral compass as Iron Fist gives in to the sickness around him and starts fighting back. But Spider-Man jumps in to take him away before he can land his fist on the people and then fills him in with positivity. But Spider-Man himself has had enough as he's had a breakdown and breaks the brick chimney into pieces with absolute anger. He keeps wondering if his father was right and if he should give in to the circumstances around him. Meanwhile, Cloak seems to have some sort of breakthrough. Shriek decides to go on with their plan of killing some more people before Carnage can return, but Carnage finds out about this and he arrives at the scene and conveys his anger on Shriek for killing people without his permission by beating her up. There we go, another moment that clearly indicates how toxic this relationship is. As Doppelganger comes on his way to attack Shriek, he kills Doppelganger. The others realize how dangerous this is, and it might actually not be worthwhile for them to continue to stick with Carnage. But while all this was happening, the heroes had managed to pacify the people as Shriek had lost her control over them. And as they face the enemy again, the enemy laughs at them for trying again and only failing. But suddenly, they hear a voice that states that the darkness will stop right here. And Shriek lets out a gasp as they see Cloak appear with Dagger as a bright light surrounds her. Chapter 13. War of the Heart. I think it's time. The two different groups of heroes and villains are completely shaken by what they're witnessing as they see Dagger standing in front of them and a bright light emanating from her. Shriek couldn't believe this miracle as she had herself killed her with the burst of energy, but it was due to this burst of energy that Dagger received massive feedback and it turned her into literally light. And since this energy became too much for her, she exploded. She would have died, but she'd managed to seek refuge in the darkness of Cloak's cloak, and she kept wandering around inside there. That's how she was actually able to communicate with Cloak and finally managed to escape. Shriek lets out a loud outcry, but Carrion, who now takes her as a mother figure, stops her, upon which he's hit by Shriek. But as she continues to go toward Dagger, she's thrown back by a blow from her. Both teams jump in to help but are held back because Carnage, the toxic lover, wants to see if Shriek can actually deal with this all by herself, and Cloak wants it to go through and through, but he'll be around for Dagger if she needs help. Dagger goes closer to Shriek and she starts glowing from every pore on her body. Nobody else can see what's happening around them. Meanwhile, Dagger is trying to convert Shriek. Shriek shows a bit of vulnerability and then hits back at her with full power while Spider-Man manages to get hold of her. Dagger feels that she failed, but Spider-Man reassures her that this entire thing only proves that they're almost there, that they might actually get through and defeat the enemy. Spider-Man signals to the others that it's time, and then he goes on to attack the enemy all by himself. Carnage expresses his worry to Shriek as he was wondering if Dagger had an impact on her and if she might end up switching sides. But Shriek seems to have no such impact. They fight back against Spidey, and while the rest of the villains have run away, Demogoblin also joins in to attack Spider-Man. We see Shriek hit Spider-Man with her dark powers, and this causes him to bring to the front every bad thought he'd ever had, as it slowly seeps into him, trying to bring forth the darker aspects of him. But he was a bait. The other heroes show up with a gun that's linked to Deathlock circuitry, and it's an Alpha Magni illuminated, and its purpose is to, in a sense, bomb you with goodness. This was actually Spider-Man's plan based on what he witnessed during the various moments when good took over darkness during the battle. Shriek's the first one to go down as the beam fills her with positivity, and the same thing happens with Demogoblin, who falls down and gets weakened by it. Meanwhile, Carnage tries to battle the effects of this power and fails terribly as he falls in excessive pain and finally gives in. As the heroes come in to see the outcome, they discover that Shriek has completely given in to goodness, while Demogoblin has forgotten who he was, but Carnage has a completely different reaction to it. The heroes discover that he's died because of the attack, and while it seems like a failure to them, they realize this outcome was purely accidental, as their intention from the very start was to make sure that he survives in the end. After a while, with everyone gone, Spider-Man sits at Central Park and wonders about the events that have transpired in front of him and how much of an impact they've had. He thanks his uncle and aunt that he was brought up in a manner where he remained stuck to his good morale, and it's what ended up saving the day. But Venom sneaks up behind him and blames Spider-Man for getting tortured by Carnage and facing the horrible conditions. While his weakness fails him to attack Spider-Man, someone else has been waiting to make their entry this whole time. From the lake rises Carnage, and he states that he's alive and well. Just when you thought it was over, things took a completely different turn. Chapter 14. The Hatred, the Horror, and the Hero. You need to have a little faith. Carnage comes back and jumps right back at Venom, blaming him for everything he experienced when the beam of energy hit him. It seems that he's back, but he carries a lot of things on his shoulders as the beam brings back certain thoughts and memories in his head that he'd buried for a long time. Venom realizes that this has at the same time made him a lot more vulnerable and uses it against him to attack him back. Carnage finds an opportunity and sneaks away, but Spider-Man tells Venom that they need to alert everyone. To this, Venom responds that he'll handle it alone and not let those heroes take on Carnage because they won't have the guts to do what needs to be done. Spider-Man decides he needs to take some rest for a while, get back to his strength, and then join this battle again. He goes back to Mary Jane and decides to go to a hospital. In the hospital, we can see the effects of the positivity that's been spread as people rejoice in the win, and even on the streets, people are enjoying the heroic victory. Somewhere else, Morbius and Nightwatch wonder at the innocence of these people as they didn't witness what they did when Carnage was at the peak of his mayhem. They wonder if they'll be allies again and bid farewell to each other. As Peter comes back, he realizes that he needs to have a much-needed conversation with his father based on the talk they had before Spider-Man went to fight Carnage. Peter tells him that whatever Richard had considered to be the only way wasn't actually the only way, but the way he was treated in his years of confinement that made him believe that, and that there's hope in the form of friends and allies and the good in people, and the good always manages to win. After a while, Peter realizes that it's time that he goes back to finish what he'd left unfinished and put an end to Carnage. Meanwhile, Carnage visits all the vital places that have scarred him for the rest of his life, the very first being Rikers Island, where he was kept with Eddie Brock. Venom follows him closely and manages to stop Carnage from hurting the guards at the prison. While Venom may disagree, he's a lot more different from Carnage, and that becomes evident here in this final battle, where Venom saves a particular guard who thanks him, even though he's been known to murder a lot of people in the past. Then Carnage heads over to the foster home where he was brought up, and the ghosts of his past haunt him there, and Venom jumps right in to beat him up. Venom manages to beat up the vulnerable Carnage, and is about to make a rather brutal move when Spider-Man jumps in and stops him. Again, Carnage manages to get away. Felicia Hardy checks in on Peter Parker by calling Mary Jane and discovers that Carnage is still alive and out on the loose. She realizes that dealing with Venom and Carnage alone will be too much for Spider-Man and wonders if she should go. They reach a cemetery where Carnage is trying to dig out his mother's grave. As Spider-Man and Venom reach there, Venom gives one of the best lines in the comic book. "Way to go, sicko. Is your mind so fried that you're forced to dig up your greatest hits?" Spider-Man realizes that Cassidy is in a really vulnerable condition and is completely different from the way he was before the beam from the good bomber had hit him. Venom continues with his blows at Carnage, but this time Spider-Man comes in between them and tries to explain to Venom that Carnage might be perceiving things differently now. But as he's delivering this speech, Carnage himself attacks Spider-Man. As he's aware that Venom won't let him live, he decides that he'll make Spider-Man his final victim. But just when he goes ahead to make his move, Black Cat jumps in and throws him off. As Spider-Man and Black Cat catch up, Venom takes Carnage and launches him into some generators and causes a huge explosion. As the smoke clears, Spider-Man and Black Cat discover Cassidy's body, but Venom can't be seen anywhere. Black Cat suggests that they should launch a search for Venom, but then realizes it wouldn't be much of a success. Not very far from them, we can see Venom behind a truck, as he thinks to himself that he's much better since now Cassidy is in a half-dead situation, and Spider-Man would have a better idea of how to deal with this. Maybe, after all, Venom gave in to the solution Spider-Man wanted for this battle to end with Carnage not dead, but Cassidy surviving somehow. The Avengers arrive on the Quinjet, and Vision brings a stasis container with him for keeping Cassidy's body so that he doesn't regenerate. Surprisingly, they find that the coffin that Carnage was digging up is actually empty, and Spider-Man wonders about the number of bizarre reasons there might be for that. As Black Cat states, she still feels that Carnage might turn up again someday, but Spider-Man asks her to keep hope as he walks away from the graves of Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn in the same cemetery. There you go. That's one of the craziest stories to come out of Marvel, and yet it's filled with some of the most interesting plot points and moments that make us realize what makes a hero. While at some points it does feel like the story was being dragged, we can be sure that it still hits the mark, and that might explain why it's a fan favorite.